We are here on day 6 of negotiations at the Bonn SB60s. This is Seb, our colleague from Mercy for the Animals. Maybe you could present yourself and explain a little bit what you're doing and what's going on, and maybe what you expect. What outcome are you expecting?
Absolutely, and thanks so much. We have a few different things happening in the negotiations at this session with potentially exciting implications for food systems and the needed transition to plant-based diets. So one of them is with the agriculture negotiations. These have been stalled over the last year, but we're finally seeing some movement in the negotiations, and I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll have a decision coming out of this session, which will allow the work program to proceed. There's still a lot of questions about what that decision will look like. So first of all, will it include consumption, which is something that is really important that it does? And second of all, what kind of impact will it have either on the consumption side or the production side? So for example, will the outcomes of this work program be used to inform countries' climate policies and their nationally determined contributions? More broadly, we're seeing food come up in other items of the negotiations. For example, there was the agreement in the Global Goal on Adaptation at COP28 that there'd be a target on food and agriculture. And right now we're seeing the very start of a 2-year work program to develop indicators for that target, as well as other targets which are also relevant to food. So for example, a target on health, a target on ecosystems. So we're really hoping that those indicators will define the kind of food system that we would need to have and take into account the importance of diets for adapting to the climate change that is already and increasingly happening as well.
Thank you. So for what you're saying and for the outcomes that we saw at the last COP, it seems that food systems are bit by bit getting a bit more integrated, or a bit more mentioned, at least during negotiations. We obviously know that negotiations tend to be a bit slow. Do you see anything that would potentially happen that could be meaningful for food systems?
Absolutely. So I think that's a really important point, where we used to just see food happening maybe in the agriculture section of the negotiations, but we're seeing the significance of it spread throughout the negotiation agenda, and that's really important. 2 additional things which I'll highlight. There'll be the further development of the adaptation indicators happening in the run-up and after COP. We'll also see countries starting to submit their nationally determined contributions around COP or in the few months after COP. And we're hopeful that a lot of these will include action on food and specifically the promotion of plant-based diets as part of climate plans. At COP29, we should also see a new agreement on finance. This will be on the quantity of finance available, and there's an opportunity there for that to support better food systems as well. Outside of this, we've seen some exciting developments in the culture of food that surrounds these negotiations. At COP28, for the first time, there was a majority plant-based menu. This is something that's tremendously important for raising awareness of how critical this action is. Here at this session, we saw a big improvement in the offerings that they had, the plant-based food offerings for negotiators, delegates, other attendees, and we also had a letter launched by 250 civil society organizations from around the world, asking the COP29 presidency to not only maintain the really landmark progress that we saw in having sustainable catering at COP28, but to build upon that progress and to have a predominantly plant-based and more plant-based menu again at COP29.
Thank you so much, Seb. And just last question that I wanted to ask, if you consider the current state of negotiations, and even let's say that we could arrive to some sort of ambitious agreement, do you think that it's still going to be enough considering the current state of the planet and the current state of food systems?
That's a great question. We'll not only need to see very ambitious agreements happen, but we'll also need to see those agreements be implemented at the national level. I think a lot of that will depend on how ambitious countries are, but also how successfully organizations like ours are able to push that ambition and push that implementation. So we see really strong commitments, we see support for those commitments, and we see countries turning those commitments into action. We have a lot of reasons to be optimistic, but there's a lot of work to do as well.
Thank you so much, Seb.
Thank you, and thank you for the terrific work you've been doing here also.
Thank you, Seb.